The first two lines are for those of us who already identify with being a Buddhist, and it's just reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, things like that. And the second two lines are really what for all of us. It's the Tibetans would say, set your motivation. We would say, what's my purpose? What's our goal? Why are we here together? What's the purpose? Well, the purpose is to listen to Buddha's teachings. I mean, that includes me, I promise. Even though I'm talking, I'm listening. And why are we listening? It's very simple. Because we want some tools from it, some advice from it. Not just to be sort of, inspired, not just to sort of listen to rubbish words, but it's meant to be advice. There's not a single word here that I'll be saying that isn't advice. But the point is, you don't need to take it. You're the boss, not Buddha. But the thing is to listen to it as advice. And if you choose to take it, what's it for? Well, one, to help you develop your amazing potential. We all know how incredible Buddha is in terms of what potential we've got. And two, guess what? So we all live in this crazy world together so we can be of benefit to others. That's the bottom line. Thinking like that as we sing the prayer. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsuchi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsuchi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsuchi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Okay. So uncertainty is a very sweet word, isn't it? And what Buddha calls it, guess what, folks, everything's impermanent. I mean, whether we've heard all this stuff 1,000 times, by the way, or whether we've never heard it before, we listen in the same way. We listen to it as if we hadn't heard it before. We listen to it freshly, okay? And not just kind of with our arrogance think, oh, I know that, I've already heard that. Don't think that way. Think it like really fresh, then it'll go in more deeply. It'll become like a taste, So impermanence is like Buddha's first teaching, entry-level junior school, grade 1. Buddha, Tangpa in his Lam Rim, this wonderful packaging of all Buddha's teachings, taking it from Atisha, this marvelous yogi scholar who went to Tibet and spent the last 17 years of his life there. He wrote this little book when he got to Tibet. Dharma had been there several hundred years, but I think he thought they'd lost the plot a little bit, so he wrote this little text, taking this is the point, taking the essence from the entire vast body of Buddhist knowledge, metaphysics, epistemology, etymology, all of it, taking all the essential points and presenting them in a nice, orderly way. Orderly according to our capacity to internalize it, which is how we learn anything. And so the very first thing, Atisha gets to do is he takes Buddha's vast teachings about impermanence, about uncertainty, that it's the natural state of the universe, and he presents it in particular, though, in relation to the impermanence of this person. But let's just talk broadly here about impermanence, the impermanence of things. So the point is this, though: why is he telling us things are uncertain? Why is he telling us things are impermanent? The only reason he surely is telling us because he's seeing that we don't realize it. This is something, one way of describing the entire Buddha's path, actually. One way of describing the entire Buddha's path is it's Buddha's view of reality. And he's telling us these things because he says, I'm sorry, folks, you're not in sync with reality, and this is why you suffer. His key point is, as we often talk, one approach to Buddhism is how to be happy, how not to suffer. One approach to Buddhism, and it comes to the same thing, is how to live a life of ethics. And another approach is how to get wise and stop ignorance. And they all come to the same thing. They all come to the same thing. And that last one is the particular one to really understand. This is really when we understand Buddhism. Basically, what Buddhism is Buddha's presentation from his own direct experience of how things exist, And he says that the extent to which we suffer, the extent to which we're not happy, is the extent to which we're not in sync with how things exist. So, of course, it's his view. But, Lenin tells us about how things exist, and Jesus tells us how things exist. And, you've got around Australian Aboriginals have a really incredible view about how things exist. And so it's our job to listen to these views or not, or to just take, and to try and take on board, and in this case with Buddhism, because we want to be happy, and that's the reason to think about why things exist, not just to fill your head with philosophy. It's because you want to be happy. That makes sense to us. So we're not happy, Buddha says. We suffer, he says, because we're not in sync with how things exist, which is a really interesting take on life. Whoever would have thought that we're not in sync with reality? When we see a cup, we think it's a cup. When we think, I'm in love with my husband, we're in love with our husband. We're not realizing, as Lama Zopa says, we're not realizing that there's certain parts of our mind, we're going to go into all this, all the delusions, all the neuroses in our mind, they're the ones that are causing us not to see reality. What they're doing is, The way Lama Zopa says, the way the world out there appears back to us, the way the world out there appears back to us is through my words, through the lenses of what's in our mind. The way the world appears back to us is in the aspect, as they say it in Buddhist psychology, of what's in our mind. And that's what we have to learn to become familiar with. This is why we suffer. So uncertainty means things change. So and then you analyze, well, why should I be upset if things change? We've got to think about it. Why should I be upset? Why are we freaking out? Why are we getting depressed? Why are we getting worried? Why are we getting anxious? We should ask that question. Why? I mean, why? Because why, I tell you, isn't because things change. If your cup breaks and your husband leaves you or you get COVID-19, why are we upset? Not because things are changing, but because we have this deep primordial assumption that somehow they shouldn't change. This is what's fascinating. But because these assumptions, and this assumption here about, as Lama Zopa calls it, grasping at things as permanent, because we have this deep assumption that things shouldn't change, but it's so deep in us, it's such a level of assumption that we don't even notice it. We just believe in that story. And this is what we have got to get in touch with, you know. I remember one time one of the classes, and one woman was saying, and this is very common, isn't it? She was thinking, she thinks all the time about her husband leaving, her husband dying, her husband not having a husband. She thinks about it, she worries about it, she chews it like a dog with a bone, you know? And she said, well, give me some advice about how to be in the moment. I said, forget about being in the moment, for God's sake. How about having courage and confront the truth that, guess what, honey, your husband will die. I mean, if you say that to yourself, then what is there to be afraid of anymore? He will die, it's a fact. But people say, oh, of course he's not going to die. Well, I'm sorry, he will die, and you don't even know when. So if this is reality, then Buddha's saying once we get in sync with this reality, nothing will disturb us, because it won't be surprising. This is what we have to do, you know. So of course it's not easy, because we're addicted to not wanting things to change. And then, of course, we've got to analyze, why do we want things not to change? Why are we scared of change? Or, you know, why are we terrified of change? Why do we think things shouldn't change? It's because we're attachment. And this is where, you know, I mean, we've met some of us before. I keep saying the same thing. Sometimes I feel like a fraud, you know, because I keep saying the same thing. But it is the same thing every time. It's just we have to keep hearing it, and hearing is part of the practice. So let's look at the mind then, and what it is in our minds that prevent us from recognizing an evident truth that's staring us in the face, that things change every millisecond. So fascinating, you know. But before we do that, let's talk about this impermanence. I mean, the teachings in Buddhism are vast on how things change, you know, and it's really it's not just kind of nice, cute idea. There's vast literature on this. So there's a level of change that's called subtle impermanence, and there's a grosser level that's evident to anybody, like death and relationships finishing, and couches getting old, and computers breaking, you know, getting sick. These are gross impermanence, and that's evident to anybody with a mind, you know, it's really evident. But the subtler one is the one that actually almost can be confused with understanding emptiness. That subtle impermanence is really quite profound. It's the nature of how things are. You can't even pin anything down, no matter how, you know, like if you have a stopwatch, we have these brilliant stopwatches these days that kind of break up seconds into like a millionth of seconds. Even if you break it up into 10 millionths of seconds, you'll never come down to the fundamental building block of a second or anything, because as the Buddha is saying, the nature of everything is constantly changing. So at the very beginning of the teachings, when our teacher gets us to think about impermanence and death, which is a real wake-up call, and that's his agenda, to give us a wake-up call not to waste his precious life, then that level, don't forget, you know, forget about it, subtle impermanence. It's very cute and nice, and we can get very excited about it. He gets us right between the eyeballs when he gets us to realize that this person, and this is just as a valid way of talking about impermanence, whether it's changing your job or running out of money or your husband leaving you or getting old. But one of the most powerful one is the fact that this person is impermanent. This person, the length of the life of this person, of this me, is utterly uncertain, you know. If you're clairvoyant, maybe not. But who's clairvoyant? We're not. But thinking of impermanence of anything. So then we hear the Buddha's telling us that things are impermanent. And then we go, yeah, I know that, but I don't feel any different. Well, you know, it's because we haven't gotten used to it yet. And this is what we have to really understand, you know. You've got to think about it and think about it and think about it again and again and again. And if you think about it properly, not just kind of intellectually and being clever, it slowly begins to, you know, the penny slowly begins to drop. And it starts to have an effect on our lives. I mean, all the Lamas say, once we've really begun to realize to some degree of certainty that everything is changing, that things are impermanent, that nothing is certain, already we become so practical. Already we can navigate life and not have mental breakdowns, you know. Already we can. It's really quite profound. But the point is we've got to wait. We've got to be patient, because it takes time. And why does it take time? Because we're so addicted to the lie.
that things won't change, things shouldn't change, how dare things change, or that's the thing. Or if they do change, I mean, the thing is this is where it comes to attachment. I always quote Nicole Kidman. I love Nicole Kidman, but I always use her name. I'm not trying to criticize. I remember reading in Vanity Fair like 30 years ago or 25 years ago when she was with Tom Cruise, and this interview with both of them. I'll never forget, the end was very fascinating. She said, "We will be together until we're 80. With certainty." And what was so amazing, the next sentence she said, "if we won't be, I will be devastated." But let's look at the first sentence, because this is the point. So this is how we feel when attachment gets what it wants. So this is where we have to look at the mind for a second. As we all know, Buddha's got this amazing, very unique, very distinct view of the mind, quite unlike how we think about it in our modern psychology. He divides up all the category, all the contents of our mind, all the contents of our mental consciousness, our thoughts and feelings and emotions. He divides into 3 categories. They even say in the text, but every time I ask somebody where this original text is, nobody knows. They all quote Buddha as saying there are 84,000 distinct neurotic states of mind, the first category. Then there's 84,000 direct antidotes to them, which are the virtues. And the third lot, I like to call these the mechanics of our mind, like intelligence, concentration and good memory, etc., etc. Mindfulness, for example. As Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. It's not a virtue in its nature, but it's a necessary state of mind. We'll discuss those later. But these first lot are really hugely important to understand, this distinction between the neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, unhappy, miserable states of mind that also happen to have the particular function of that's the function of those states of mind is to exaggerate, to distort reality. It's these states of mind that cause us to live in La La Land, okay? But the Buddha has found, this is what's so ingenious about the Buddha has found that these states of mind, the neuroses, these misconceptions, these delusions, these afflictions as they call them, these mental illnesses, which would be a good translation, they're not at the core of our being. They're not at the core of our being. This is what's so outrageous about the Buddha, If you think the word Buddha, which is the end result of all this work, the word Buddha, it's so tasty, the etymology. The first syllable, Bud, implies the eradication utterly from our mind of all neuroses, all attachment, all anger, all fears, all grasping at permanence, etc. This is a shocking concept in modern psychology, an outrageous idea. Buddha has found from his own direct experience, he's not a creator, remember, he hasn't made it up, it's not revelation, he's not speculating, he has found directly from his own experience that stuff is not at the core of our being and can be utterly removed. Not only that, if we're on the Mahayana path, we can cultivate, we can totally perfect. The second one, we can perfect all the goodness in the mind, which is the stuff that is at the core of our being, is indestructibly part of who we really are. This is what's so fascinating. That's the end result. So if we hear that, what's the job of being a Buddhist? Work on your mind, baby. This is the one. Know your mind intimately. So, these neuroses, Ling Rinpoche, has Ling Rinpoche been to Australia, Miffy? The young Ling Rinpoche? Has he been to Australia?
Yes, but mostly to Perth.
Oh, okay. So anyway...
He has Langri Tangpa Centre once.
Oh, okay, good. Well, everyone tells me that they've never heard this before, and I'd never heard it before until it came out of his mouth. He always says it, that these 84,000, misconceptions, this map of the mind that Buddha presents that came from these amazing Indians before him. Buddha didn't make it up. It comes from these incredible Hindus before him, as I always quote, as His Holiness says, with these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago, who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self, and Buddha came out of that tradition. These 84,000 neurotic states of mind, they're all subsumed to these 3. And then this is the thing that Ling Rinpoche said. 21,000 are rooted in ego grasping, the root delusion. 21,000 are rooted in attachment. And 21,000 rooted in anger, the 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. And then 21,000 are rooted in all 3. That's so delicious. This amazing map of the mind that they've had for several thousand years. We probably thought we made up psychology 100 years ago, didn't we, with Mr. Freud? We're so arrogant, So anyway, these neuroses, these 3 poisons, 3 toxic emotions, call them that. These are the source of all our problems. It sounds almost hilariously simple to say something like this, but this is exactly Buddha's view, So the attachment is the main voice of ego grasping. Ego grasping is the one that's the problem altogether. And once that's uprooted, we're climbing out of samsara into our nirvana. We're on the way, baby. But the main voice, effectively the main source of our pain in daily life, the main one, this is so hard to hear because we make it so complicated, is attachment. This bottomless pit
of this emotional hunger, this dissatisfaction, this emotional hunger, this assumption I haven't got enough, and it's got this hubris, this kind of entitlement that I only should get the nice things, and then the panic attack of anger or aversion when I don't get the nice things. This is how we function day to day. So because of this attachment, it seems to me, because let's say, you know, with Nicole, and I love this woman, when she was in love with Tom, or as she said, in lust, they fell in lust at the beginning. We understand that one. It's very nice to have a bit of lust. Well, I remember once, years ago. So they fell in lust. So then they were living together. And then, of course, everything was gorgeous. Think about it. Our own lives now. I mean, most of us are not under the bridge somewhere, are we? We've probably got a house and a mattress, have we? And we've got probably a person in the house we live with. And then think how this is how we are. And this is the thing with Nicole and the same with us. When something's going nicely, so she had the children, she had the husband, they come home every day, the house was still there, Tom was still there. So what do? We take it for granted. We think it's permanent. That's what it means, take it for granted. It's going to be there. She was at work coming, you know, shooting a movie, and she can't wait on the way home, on the motorway or the freeway, and she's imagining Tom in the kitchen, hello darling, and she talks about her day. We are all like that. So we have this assumption, because you left home this morning, because she left Tom there this morning in the house, she assumes with 1,000,000,000% certainty that of course he'll be there tonight. That's how we grasp at things as permanent. That's because why? Because the attachment is so enormous. All of us have this. This is how we are. You've got this delicious thing, and so it is beyond unbearable to think of not having it. That's why we live in denial of reality. That's why, because we can't bear the thought. Now, look what happened. Exactly as she said, next sentence. And if we won't be together till we're 80, I will be devastated. And sure enough, you know, when he left her for Penelope Cruz or whatever happened, she was devastated. I remember reading another article. She was in fetal position on the ground, you know, and her mother kicked her, said, get on with life. What happened then? The bubble burst. The attachment bubble that she projected onto herself as something that will last forever, because you can't bear to think of it as changing. So we set ourselves up for this crazy suffering, you know. Then what happened? She's in fetal position in despair. And now look what happens. Now she can't imagine that will change. So what do you think? She can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's why we kill ourselves. Because the bad thing has now happened, and because it's beyond unbearable, and we can't see that will change. So it's so evident in our lives. Everybody understands this. Forget about describing emptiness. It's too complicated. This is so evident. And even conquering this misconception, which won't change overnight. We've got to hear the words, though, and we remind ourselves every day. Every time you read it and think about it and remind yourself when you grasp at something and devastated because it's changing. And that can be to the tiniest thing, you know. You're washing the dishes and you break something. You just broke a cup. You freaked out, you know. You freak out because your attachment didn't get what it wanted, and you freaked out because you thought your cup was permanent because you're attached to it. I mean, this, you can see, it pervades our lives, ordinary life. But part of the problem, like I talk all the time, you know, because in our culture we're so addicted to the mug and to the husband and to the life and to the real thing out there, we don't look at the mind. So when the bad thing happens in the day and you just didn't get what you wanted, which is attachment being thwarted, or when the thing broke that you're attached to and it's broken, you're now disappointed because you thought it shouldn't break, then we always get upset because we have these assumptions that we live according to, and we don't question those assumptions. And so but we don't notice all the baby events throughout the day of attachment not getting what it wants. 1,000 times a day your attachment is thwarted. And then what do? You get annoyed, you get upset. But who goes to their therapist for getting upset? You don't go to your therapist, oh, I got upset today. Well, shut up, Robina, and go home and come back when you want to kill your husband. Our trouble is we wait till it's too late. We don't pay attention to these mini moments of frustration and attachment, unhappy, and not getting what we want, and worry and fears. We don't pay attention until it's too late. And that's our major problem. And that's where the Buddha's view is so incredible. He gives us these skills to start on our mind well before the Vesuvius explodes, well before your wheels fall off, you know, at 100 k's an hour on the motorway or the freeway. Oh, my wheels are falling off. What'll I do? Well, a bit late, okay? This is the thing the Buddha is saying. We've got to start to pay attention. Not wait till the body feels something, which is what we do, and not wait till the outside thing goes wrong. Start to be aware of the mind. That's his skill. It's his brilliant skill, you know. Be our own therapist, as Lama Yesi says. I mean, you know, whether we're talking about attachment or grasping at permanence, you can see how they're also linked to each other. They all work together. They're so integrated. But this is where the skill is. We have to learn to know which delusion is functioning at which time.
And that's why we have to learn to see our mind. And that's why, you know, we have to learn to study the mind. I mean, you teach low rig there, Miffy? You must teach some type of thing like low rig, right?
We have quite in-depth discovering Buddhism, and then we're also doing Langri Chenmo.
Okay, so you must go on about, you must give details about the mind then.
Yes.
So that's wonderful. Yes, that's the thing. And that's where, you know, I mean, we've all met, some of us met before. We can see that we can say we like Buddhism, but that's part of our problem in a way. We kind of conflate liking Buddhism with knowing it. And that's where, and some of us also will say, well, you know, I'm not intellectual. I just want to practice. But you have to know the words, you know, you have to know the words. So uncertainty, let's look at that. Let's look at how things are changing. It's sort of almost too evident to talk about, but we should. But the key point is this, the key point, and this is what Buddha is saying across the board, that we suffer because of the misconceptions in our mind. It's such a curious way to see things. It's really quite astonishing, actually, because it's not how we think. We just take it for granted that if you get sick, you know, of course you're going to suffer. We say, of course I'm suffering, I get sick. Of course I'm suffering, my husband left me. Of course I'm suffering, I'm running out of money. And this is not diminishing it. I mean, right now some of you people might be having incredible money worries because of this crazy sickness business going on, you know, losing your job. I mean, I'm talking about America, it's unbelievable here. 1 million people a week applying for unemployment, you know. People are literally not be able to pay their rent. I can't imagine that. And some of you might be exactly that. So it's easy to say, oh, you're suffering because of your mind. It almost sounds arrogant, doesn't it? Because some people's suffering is so bad. But we can still see some people, no matter how bad things get, somehow are able to see that if they work on their mind, it's not so bad. And that's the key. It's not like, well, you know, stop telling me it's my mind is the problem because we think it's the blame. I've got a real problem here. My husband's leaving me. I've got a real problem here. I'm running out of money. It's true. They are real problems. Terrible things happen to us in life. Terrible things. There's no question. And whether it's dealing with attachment, whether we're dealing with anger, whether we're dealing with the husband, you know, whether we're dealing with grasping at permanence, the issue is the same, you know. We just have to identify what that particular problem is in the mind. And of course, when you start to apply the technique, it doesn't work. Naturally, when you first got on a bike to ride it, of course you can't stay on the bike. You get on one side, you fall off the other. You don't say, oh, I tried to ride a bike, I've given up. You've got to keep going. And that's the same with all these teachings of the Buddha, you know. And that's why just reading some books, listening to the thoughts, hearing His Holiness the Dalai Lama talk, hearing authentic teachings. Just listen to it, absorb it, listen to it, and start to apply and start to internalize those thoughts until eventually they become your experience. That's what happens, you know. It's the same how we learn anything. You never heard of mathematics before. You never heard of 1 + 1 is 2. You come home from school, oh, mummy, I heard that 1 + 1 is 2. Well, I never heard that before. Well, what do you have to do? Don't just believe it. You go internalize it until it becomes your truth. That's what we're trying to do here, you know. So impermanence is fairly evident, isn't it? I mean, it's the very first level of the teachings, actually, as I said. Things are uncertain. How to navigate it. So but it's the hardest job we'll ever do. Because why? Various reasons. The key reason is because and this is reinforced in our culture, you know, that we are addicted, completely addicted to the external world, to the objects of our 5 senses. This is the grossest level of our being, the 5 senses, you know. And we immediately meet the objects of the 5 senses. The second we wake up in the morning, already the 5 senses are working overtime, aren't they? We're seeing things, hearing things, touching, tasting, and smelling. And that's the world we occupy. And that for us even is what we think that's the world. That's life. Life is literally out there. I'm this kind of innocent victim in the middle of it, and then these things out there kind of bombard me. And then we've got attachment that is only wanting the nice things out there, and then the aversion and the panic when the nice things don't happen. So we live, this is all spontaneous. We come into this life, Buddha says, you know, programmed with these tendencies, completely programmed to perfection from countless lives, he says, of practicing this stuff. Mummy didn't have to teach us this. It's completely spontaneous and automatic. And that's the major reason that we don't pay attention to the thoughts. So first of all, we see everything out there. And then it seems to us to appear, doesn't it, when there's a pleasant sound, even when you're a baby, a sound that doesn't offend you, then your mind is peaceful. So naturally we think, oh, pleasant sounds are the cause of happiness. Then when you taste the food that suits your mind or it suits your senses, and the food triggers a nice pleasure, and it does, then naturally we think the food is the cause of the happy feelings. When your mother smiles at you, your little girl, and she says you're a beautiful little girl, and you feel so happy, we naturally think mother's words are the cause of my happiness. This is completely spontaneous. And that's why as we start to study the mind, let's go into this on our 3 Saturdays, to unpack the technology of the way these different states of mind all work together to keep us locked into this belief that the external world is the cause of my happiness and the external world is the cause of my suffering. It's very interesting the way, it's the technology of it, how it is, which implies both past karmic imprints and habits, and then our responses to things now. And because they're completely instinctive. And what's instinctive? For the Buddha, something is instinctive when you've thought it or done it or said it. So often, it's now second nature. We get that. But because we think Mummy made me, because we think God made me, we think I began in my mother's womb, we think this is just, we call it natural. And when we say something is natural, we assume that it's unnatural if you won't like it. Or we assume it's just the way it is and it's not changeable. That's a very deep kind of assumption in our minds. So it's natural to get angry when things go wrong. It's natural to be afraid when you hear a loud voice. It's natural to be this or that, we say. So natural means it's set in stone. This is the key point that Buddha's saying. Forget emptiness. That's much more subtle. But this is leading us to that. Yes, it's natural insofar as we all like it, but he's got his Buddha's view is a way of describing why we are like that. And that implies the methodology for changing it. Because the fundamental point that is in the entirety of the Buddhist view of the universe is that there's nothing that can't be changed. There's nothing in our mind we can't change. There's nothing, there's no suffering, there's no causes of suffering we can't uproot, and there's no happiness we can't accomplish. So impermanence is not just some cute idea, you know. It pervades the entirety of Buddha's view of his analysis, his observation of the way the universe functions. But the thing is, we hear what he's saying, everything changes, this is this blah blah. So what we've got to do is listen to that and then attempt to identify in the mind the opposite view, the one that we believe is true. What we believe is true, and then try to slowly listen to the words and unpack, and to help to listen and try to internalize the opposite view and make that our habit, you know. Of course, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, here you are right now, some of you, maybe your husband has left you, maybe you've just been told you have got COVID-19 or cancer or something devastating. This is not undermining, this is not kind of diminishing our suffering. Our suffering is real, but it's hard to hear. So the main cause of the suffering is not the cancer. The main cause of the suffering is not the husband leaving. The main cause, and this is really hard to hear this. And that's why you have to listen to Buddhist view carefully and try to attempt to think about it. Don't kind of use it as a whip to beat yourself with and make yourself feel guilty. Oh, I'm the blame, am I? We say. No. Our suffering is real. But the cause of our suffering is these delusions. And that's why, because we have this view, you know, this kind of, I think, we have this very strong view, I think. The view of ego is like being an innocent victim. That's the feeling of the way Lama Yeshe would call ego. He'd call it the self-pity me. It sounds so cruel, doesn't it? You know, the self-pity me. It sounds really cruel because it feels like he's blaming. Therefore, I'm a bad person. I mean, the main thing of ego is we want to be an innocent victim. We want to get off the hook. We want to not be accountable, not be responsible. It's not my fault. We speak like that, you know. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. We say that like a real philosophy. That's my sister in Melbourne calling me. So we've got to really try and hear in a fresh way, without guilt, without neurosis, without blame. It's not punitive, you know. And that's why I always say it, it's important for us to hear it. We've got to understand, you know, when Buddha talks about negative actions and negative states of mind, and this is the cause of your suffering, it really does sound heavy to us, you know. And of course, Tibetans are pretty kind of fundamentalist the way they talk. They're very funny. They're kind of coming from the 10th century a bit, whatever. But the thing is, we've got to hear it in a different way. When we understand that our view of morality, our view of ethics in the world, whether your mother says do this or whether God says it, in both cases, we hear it as you'd better do this, because if you don't, you'll get punished. That's how we hear it, and that's what's meant. If you're a naughty girl and you don't do mummy's wishes, we know it means I will get into trouble. And if we don't do God's wishes, we know that's called a sin. And that's actually the definition of a sin. I asked my Jesuit priest friend. I always quote this. A sin by definition is doing what God said not to do. By definition. But Buddha's not like that. He's not a creator. And it's important to keep remembering this. It's not just some weird idea. It's got profound experiential implications. That's why they always talk about the Buddha, like the analogy of being a doctor. When your doctor tells you you might get cancer, don't smoke, it's not because she's going to punish you with cancer. And that's how we hear morality, though. If your mother says, don't do this, why not? She'll say, because I say so, and you'll get punished. We hear it this way, and we make that view up. That's a dualistic view. We make that up. So it's hard for us to even hear what Buddha's saying, because we hear it as like blaming us, you know. Blaming us. It's my mind that caused me to suffer, therefore I'm not suffering. Not true. We suffer terribly. So the Buddha's telling us, basically, his observation of how things exist. He's not asking you to believe it. That's the big point as well. I always quote this story. I remember, I always say this story many times. A scientist in New Zealand asked me one time, Nelson it was, I'll never forget, 20 years ago. He said, this is a really huge point, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? And I mean, he was shocked when I said, would you ask Einstein, who revealed relativity to Einstein? Of course not. Of course, you would never say that, because we think that's truth. And Einstein's telling us E equals mc squared, whatever he's saying. We know it's not revelation. We know it's not speculation. We know he's not making it up. We know it's not coming from on high. And this is the point. And the Buddha's like that, exactly like that. And Einstein is allowed to say, this is how things are. We don't get upset. Who do you think you are telling us what you think? Because we're not assuming he's demanding we believe it. He's saying, here's my methodology. If you want to find the same thing, over to you. That's the Buddha. That's the Buddha, you know. So to hear the teachings is the first step, important point. That our viewpoints, the delusions, are the source of our pain, you know. So there's that lovely thing in Lama Zopa's teachings. We should read it. It's so nice. It's coming from the Buddha's teachings. I'll find it later. When Lama Zopa's quoting in that first teaching, I think in the book about uncertainty. I think about things changing. Everything changes. See life like all those sin. What do you call them? What do you call those things? What's the word, Miffy? When you have a thing that's similar, what do you call that?
I don't know.
Never mind, I forget those words. Never mind, don't worry about it. That's something like one of those words. I forget which one it is. Never mind.
Analogy.
Analogy, synonym, metaphor. I can't remember. One of those words. Anyway, okay. I'm raving on here a bit here. I'm raving. What time is it? 22. Okay, I've just said a few things. I'm raving on a bit. That's okay. I'm saying a few things. I'd like you to ask me some questions. A simile. Thank you very much, people. It's a simile. I forgot. Okay, good. Are there any questions in the little box yet?
There's no questions in the chat yet. I did let people know,
yes,
but I have one for you that's kind of like COVID related.
Good. Go on. Thank you. Go on.
Because when we had our first wave of COVID, and it was kind of had a bit of novelty value being locked up, and people found a way to feel okay about having to isolate at home, maybe because there was this thought there's hope at the end of the tunnel. And now we've got a second wave happening in Victoria, and everyone's kind of experiencing it quite differently. It really, the mental health is going way down, because now the thought's beginning to think
it's not going to change.
Maybe it's not going to be fixed. So we're kind of losing hope. Yes. So how do you be realistic and not lose hope?
Exactly. I think this is the one about when I said to that woman. Okay, this is a very powerful point. I think a more courageous view, and this is what sounds pretty shocking, when we say there's always hope, in a way, analysing it, that's attachment talking. It's attachment thinking at some point it will be okay, because attachment always projects. Attachment looks into the past. Attachment thinks about how you want this, and it also projects into the future. And attachment is always, one of its main functions is to look forward to something. Every day you get up, you start going through your jobs. Okay, we'll do our jobs, but attachment is this busy, busy mind. Now I'll do this, and now I'll have that. And I'll have breakfast, and I'll get up. And then I'll go to lunch, and I'll do that. Then I'll go this, and then we say, now 2 weeks I'll go there, and then I'll retire, then I'll do this. We're endlessly projecting into the future because and this is when it is only attachment, and it's not just the virtuous states of mind. We have to see the difference. We'll discuss this. But when it's attachment, you're living in this buoyant fantasy of when the good thing happens. I'll be happy when that happens. In other words, the attachment one is almost like the schizophrenic state of mind that we cannot bear to simply be here at this moment in time, dealing with the washing the dishes, dealing with the pain in the knee. We're looking forward to the lunch. Oh, get all excited. You start to anticipate lunch. Then you anticipate dinner. Then you anticipate breakfast tomorrow. So always looking forward to something. This is attachment, and it's a nightmare. It's demented, which doesn't mean you don't plan your life. What we have to see is a difference between fantasy yearning, and this is beyond intellectual, and you just completely spontaneously do it because we're not satisfied. The point about attachment is we're not satisfied with whatever is now, whatever it is. Even though what we've just got now is a thing we looked forward to 5 minutes ago. As soon as we get it, it finishes and we're still not happy. So we're going to look forward to the next 5 minutes. We live like this. This is a function of attachment. It is a complete nightmare. And it's really hard to think, well, how the hell do I get out of that? Because it's just so spontaneous. So one of the approaches, like that woman who said, thinking all the time, worried about her husband dying, and try and help me be in the moment. That's too hard. The mind is too berserk. How about thinking, well, guess what? I might get COVID-19 and I might even die. I mean, it's not to be but then we think, well, now I'm going to kill myself. No, it's not being depressed. It's not even being negative. We know in our life, no matter how much we've planned and how much we've anticipated and how much we've looked forward to, sometimes we do get it. And even thinking in the grosser way, we do get that. But then something else will come along. So, but we have this assumption. Attachment has an assumption that only the nice things should happen. And it's almost like this hubris. Attachment can only bear the nice things. So it's unbearable to have nothing to look forward to. That's why my friends in prison are such a powerful example. Unbelievable example. I mean, one of my friends just now, he writes, he was 17 when he went in. He said he's grown 4 inches since he's been in prison. He's got these muscles now. He's this uncontrolled boy then. He's been in prison 25 years. He's now 40-something, getting on for 40. I think he just turned 40. And then he was told he was going to get his parole. He was unbelievably so excited, you can't imagine. Leaving this garbage dump, and all this, wrote letters, and then suddenly the parole board cancelled his meeting and they cancelled his parole. So this devastation he went through, crashed down to despair, but he picked himself up again. I mean, so it seems almost impossible. How can you learn to be happy in a garbage dump like that? And that's why I tell you, the number of people I know in prison who are just beyond despair and depression, because literally in worldly terms, you have nothing to look forward to. You're on death row or you've got a life sentence, and it's so common in this country. So in ordinary worldly terms, there's not a single reason to be happy. Because happiness is considered to be free, to have a nice house, to have a wife, to have a baby, to have a house, whatever the thing might be that you're looking forward to. So the second, so if you're in those garbage dumps and the senses are accosted every day, you're surrounded by some maniacs, people don't like you, you're considered the lowest in all society, you have nothing to look forward to. And that's why the people I so admire, some of them I've known for like 20, 25 years now, since the prison project started. They know their backs are against the wall. They know they have no choice but to learn to accept the reality of their moment now and find the good in it. This is what we have to learn to do. It's so terrifying. It's so scary because we have to find something to look forward to. That's attachment. That's attachment. We call it hope, but it's a bit illogical, really, hope. It's like a terrifying way to live your life. It's like thinking you've got to have a garden. I'll put seeds in and I'll hope that flowers grow. Life is not like that. And that's where karma comes in. This is where the Buddha's view is unbelievable, if we can really start to think about it, So this attachment of hoping is just a disaster. You're going to be disappointed because it's guaranteed. We all know, guaranteed, they're going to be 27 times a day, or if not 100, when you won't get what you want. So there's always going to be disappointment. And even the Buddha's pointing out, when we really understand attachment, even when you do get what you want, guess what? You get bored with it. You look at this boring bloke in the bed. Who's this? Get out of here. Thank you very much. I mean, so attachment cannot be satisfied. But we don't even articulate this as a problem in our culture. We just call it normal, So it's really outrageous. So the point is, the Buddha's saying, And that's why my friends, there's one woman, I always quote Sunny, this woman, you know, accused in the 70s of murder, killing a policeman with a husband on death row in Florida. I mean, this nightmare, you can't even imagine this nightmare. Her children were given to her parents and they died in a car crash, so the kids were sent off to the homes. The husband was executed and she was invited to the execution. She's still in prison. They were innocent, they didn't kill anybody. Eventually the people confessed. And his head burst into flames. I mean, there she is seeing him executed and his head burst into flames. I mean, you can't imagine this nightmare. It's so good to read somebody else's experiences sometimes. And she's this kind of person. I know her now. She's 70. She's an old lady in Ireland with her old husband. And they're running courses and retreats. She got out after 17 years, helping people who've been exonerated, you know, particularly people who've been like them, falsely accused. Her husband, she met him in Ireland. He'd been falsely accused by the Brits of killing 2 policemen. And so they're living together now and they run little courses and they help people around the world. But she's an amazing example. She used to do yoga and stuff. She's not a Buddhist. But she has this extraordinary, I mean, for me, I so admirable. She had this extraordinary ability to not go mad when terrible things happened. And that's the thing. And so she worked on her mind. She doesn't say it that way, but she said she talked about learning peace and forgiveness and yoga and those things. They were the tools she used to help her deal with her. It's like she told me one time she'd like in 7 years or 6 years in solitary confinement with a Bible. And that's all she had. Now, most people go mad. She kept saying, I realized I had choices. I mean, I can call that the most incredible emotional intelligence. You can't imagine it, you know. Just unbelievable. She had no choice. She had no choice but to change her mind. This is so unusual, so unbelievable. So for me, when you have experiences like that, when you're up against the wall and you have no luxury to move outside that room. You just have no choice, no choice. But in our world, we think there's no choice but to go mad. I remember reading at the same time as one guy, also innocent, also on death row, who literally did go mad. And the difference between them is what? She found the resources in herself to change her way of interpreting her world. And that really is the essence of what Buddha is saying. This is the essence of it, you know. It's the hardest practice. But often when the worst things happen, the best part of us comes out, you know. This is the point. We have the power to change our mind. That's the essence of everything, honestly. But our trouble is what, you know? Because the irony for us, we might as well be in prison. If we totally believe the outside world is the cause of our happiness and suffering, if we totally believe that, then when you're miserable with your boss, you come home, you moan and complain about the boss. Or your husband, doesn't matter what it is. And he might be a horrible boss. It might be a fact, a horrible boss. And you moan and complain because it's horrible, and I agree. Then someone says to you, well, you know, Buddha says you can change your mind. No. First you say, well, you know, you could leave the job. You could leave. No, not possible. I can't get another job. No, there's no other jobs. I never get the money. No. Well, you know, if you can't leave the job, you can change your mind about the job. No, can't do that. He's a monster. So we live in misery because we just don't realize, and it's not taught in our culture. It's like accidental that we learn it, that you can change your attitude towards things. But because we set everything in stone, it is bad. What do you mean I should change my mind? The thing is bad. That's why we suffer so badly, you know. So it needs enormous humility and enormous courage, and I think emotional intelligence to see we can change our mind. This is the essence of what Buddha's saying. This is really the essence of Buddha's path across the board, you know. We know these words. We do it every day in our own lives. You control your mouth and you don't say something about your sister. You forgive your sister for being mean. We know we can change our minds, but we forget because it's surrounding us, you know, and everybody else is in panic and misery. There's nothing to look forward to. My friend's in prison. I mean, my friend Sunny, 17 years in prison, finally got out of prison, you know. So when you know there's nothing, when you realize impermanence, you know that this is the only moment there is. So you make the most of it. And this seems too shocking for us. I mean, I think of Sunny and that nightmarish experience. I mean, it's easy for me to say these words. I can get what I want when I want. I've got this lovely house in New Mexico. I've got air conditioning. I can turn it on, turn it off. I've got the lovely garden outside. I've got peaches in the tree there. I've got apples in the tree over here. I mean, I can do what I want. I can lie down, sit up, stand up, make coffee, make tea. I've got complete luxury. And how dare I talk these words when Sunny's sitting there in this nightmare, or my friends in these garbage dumps, you know, treated like animals who are learning to be happy because they know they can change their mind. Or people on the street. You read and these days with COVID-19, it's kind of interesting, reading these moving stories about people. It's so interesting when bad things happen, the papers and the television are full of these moving stories, aren't they? Of wonderful people, unusual people doing special things. Anyway, blah, blah, blah.
Do you want a 5-minute break, Miffy, at the hour, or you want to keep going for 2 hours?
Well, there is one more question.
Good, let's have it.
From Marius. So he's talking about how, when we die, the energy is recycled with our body. And before you were talking then about the nature of the mind, and I think he's trying to seek some reassurance. Does the energy of the mind continue?
That's his question, yeah?
Permanent.
Is that his question?
Yep.
Okay, yes, that's the Buddha's. Who was it? Marius.
Yes.
Where's Marius? I can't see him. I want to see you, Marius. Where are you? I can't see Marius.
He's one of the students at Langri Tangpa Centre, comes to some of the things.
Oh, okay. Are you here, Marius? Are you going to show your face, or are you going to keep secret? It doesn't matter.
I'm not sure if he's got an ability for...
I can't. Okay, never mind. Don't worry. Okay, never mind. So, Marius, listen. This is the Buddha's teaching, okay? The Buddha's view, and we're discussing his view here, and it's up to us to find out if he's right or not, I just believe him, is that your mind, this is a big distinction, this is a fundamental point in Buddhism. If you're a Christian or a Muslim or you talk about a soul. If you're a Greek, they talk about some essence. The Hindus talk about a self or an Atman. So there's always this positing of something there that isn't physical. So that's the religious views say that. Then the materialist view, as we know, just says you've got body and mind, babe. You just, you're the atoms and the genes and the DNA, and that's it. So we've got these two views, and they're the prevailing views on this planet, I would suggest, aren't they? Philosophical views. The philosophical materialist view or the creator religion view. Well, Buddha's got his third view. He talks about there is also something that's not physical, but he doesn't call it a soul. He doesn't call it a spirit. He calls it the mind, and he doesn't mean the brain here. So he's describing consciousness or mind, and these words are used synonymously. So the Buddha's view of it is that's this word that we refer to our thoughts, the grosser level, our feelings, anger, rage, psychosis, love, compassion, joy, intelligence, all these components of our own thoughts and feelings and emotions, and then even these subtle levels of mind that you could roughly, vaguely say are equivalent to what they call a soul. It's more that the way that the mind functions is fundamentally different in Buddhism. So the key point that Buddha makes about this mind, 1, it is not physical. 2, it did not begin in your mother's womb. So if you're made by God, you began in your mother's womb. If you're made by mummy and daddy, you began in your mother's womb. Both cases, okay? But for the Buddha, you're not the handiwork of someone else. This is the wackiest idea for the Buddha. You're not the handiwork of a creator, and you're not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. In fact, the more you study the Buddha's psychological views, the more you study the Buddha's philosophy, the more weird and impossible it is that you can be literally the product of someone else. This is quite peculiar for the Buddha. Of course, it takes time to hear that, because that's our normal view. I'm made by mummy and daddy, if we say materialists. And then we track ourselves back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and back to the monkeys, don't we? That's the way we think. It's our science says this, our psychology says this. This is the view that prevails in our world. Buddha says not that. Your body from mummy and daddy, no probs. Mummy and daddy worked really hard for that egg and sperm to come together, didn't they? Thank you, mummy and daddy. But honey, they did not give you a mind, Marius. Your consciousness, your love, your compassion, your joy, you're good at football, you're good at music, you're being wacko, whatever it might be. These are where they come from. They do not come from a creator. They do not come from mummy and daddy. They are not physical. And guess what? They can't come from nothing. They can't just pop up out of the blue. That's ridiculous. They're the process of cause and effect. The process of cause and effect, okay? And this continuity of consciousness, think of it as like a river of mental moments. This moment of your consciousness, it's got its own main cause in the millisecond before of your consciousness. And that's linked in an unbroken chain to a previous moment, to the previous. And if you had perfect memory, you could track your mind back to the first second of conception. You keep going back in this unbroken chain of mental moments. And so the second before conception, egg was in mummy's body, sperm was in daddy's body. A holy being has nothing to do with it. Creators have no function for the Buddha. Your consciousness, where did it come from? The previous moment of itself. Of course, at a subtler level. It's all described in great detail in the literature. You've got the grosser levels and the more subtle levels of this continuity of consciousness of yours. And keep tracking back, and then in the whole Buddhist analysis, a few weeks before that, it was in another body, and so on and so forth. And of course, you keep going back, and of course, we all want to know where it began. Where did I begin? Where did happiness begin? And that's what happens when we go to our therapist. We go back into the past, looking for a needle in a haystack, aren't we? Looking for the cause of the suffering, the cause of the depression, the thing that happened. Aha, there it is. Well, honey, you won't find one. And we're not discussing the external causes here.
So this mind of ours is a river of mental moments that literally is beginningless. I mean, this is the most demented idea we've ever heard, whether you're a scientist or a Christian. The only thing that's beginningless is God. So it sounds a bit shocking to say that you're beginningless. But the Buddha would say that's logical deduction. It's a logical deduction. If cause and effect, this natural law that we call science, basically, we're brilliant at knowing it. If everything is the product of this law of cause and effect, then by definition you cannot find a thing called a first cause, because that implies it didn't come from anything, and that's an impossibility. It's just not viable. So even though it's a nutty idea, let's take the hypothesis here, Marius, that your consciousness is beginningless, and the Mahayana view says it's endless. If you're a Hinayanist, there's different teachings of Buddhism in the world, and in Thailand and Burma, you will learn that when you've achieved liberation, when you've cut all the rubbish from your mind, you won't come back, baby. You're finished. You're out of here. You're gone out. You've gone out like a puff of smoke. The Mahayanists have a problem. We Mahayanists have a problem with that. Dalai Lama laughed one time. So your consciousness is beginningless and endless. I mean, it's a hilarious idea. Who's thought this before? Nobody. It's demented. And even the universe, this is what's fascinating in the Marius and the Vajrayana teachings, in the more esoteric, the more advanced teachings, like the postgraduate teachings in Buddhism. I like to use that analogy of this lam rim that you've been hearing about with Miffy. You've got junior school, high school, university, and postgraduate. So the postgraduate teachings, the Vajrayana, this is very marvelous, and it's almost easy, very delicious presentation of the universe. There's matter in the universe, and there's minds. That's it, two kinds of matter. There's matter, which is made of the four elements. That's how we used to talk back in the Middle Ages in our culture, isn't it, in the West? The four elements, earth, air, fire, water. That's the components of matter, and then there's minds. And these are both beginningless. As His Holiness Dalai Lama said one time in all his wonderful talks with scientists, he said that Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So in other words, we all desperately want a first moment. And this is what's fascinating. For the Buddha, that's a non-question. And why we have that question, which is not evident to us now, it's one of the functions of this view of grasping at things as uncaused and unchanging and sort of somehow kind of permanent. It's very strange, It's very fascinating we have that question, such a deep one. But it's not the right question, the Buddha would say. So your consciousness, Marius, is your own. And this already, even, you see, taking this as our hypothesis, and that's the thing, I never say I believe in Buddhism. I never use that word, because I think we just become intellectually lazy, because we assume religion is something you believe. You can't prove it. Buddhists completely disagreeing. That's why I said before to that scientist, Buddha is exactly the same as Einstein. He's observed with his own mind, and indeed at a subtler level, over our Saturdays, let's go into this, mind has got these much subtler levels of cognition that we can cultivate in this amazing technique these Indians invented 3,000 years ago called single-pointed concentration. We can access these subtle levels of mind that have this capacity for cognition that's far more subtle than our gross consciousness, our senses or our conceptuality, So we take it as a hypothesis. So one of the really key ones too, is this view you take on as a hypothesis, this idea that your consciousness comes from before. And that means you come into this life, Marius, fully programmed with all your own tendencies. Not mummies and not daddies. They might share them, but yours didn't come from them. This is a massive difference. I mean, my mother was a musician. Everyone said, when she saw her little Bobsy, that's me, Bobsy's good at music, so she taught me music. So we all would say, well, Rabina's good at music because her mummy gave it to her. No, she didn't. My mother was good at music because she'd practiced something like that before, and I was good at music because I brought it with me from before, and then we happily, conveniently came together as mother and daughter, So the thing is that the Buddha, the implication of this idea that your mind is beginningless, and the implication of the idea, therefore, of the law of karma, and therefore the law of reincarnation, is that you come into this life programmed with your tendencies. I mean, you take two extremes on this planet, like Mother Teresa or Hitler, each on the opposite ends of the spectrum, isn't it? We want to blame that little old Austrian housewife. I mean, for God's sake, what did she do? Nothing. She's gave birth to this weird boy, And equally, Mother Teresa's mother's not to blame for Mother Teresa being a saint. They brought their own tendencies with them. This is a massive view in Buddhism. It's quite unique. And when we can begin to internalize this as our hypothesis, then we begin, the key point here experientially, is we start to take responsibility for what's in our mind, instead of who did it to me. It's not my fault. I'm an innocent victim. This is a really powerful function of ego, actually, the self-pity me. This is how we live in our lives. And no wonder we're so tortured, And that's where we have to start to understand attachment and aversion, which we'll go into in detail, because this is the key. Any questions?
Yeah, there are
Good.
a few questions.
Good,
So
come on in.
one of them is, why is it so hard to see our minds clearly?
Yes.
And another one, what are the steps to start seeing attachment in our own mind?
I understand. Okay, all these things. Well, this, first of all, why is it hard to see our own mind clearly? I think it's nothing complicated. It's only because it's not our habit and it's not our culture. This is a major point. I mean, to answer the second question, we'll discuss that. But the point is, in our culture, we think about it, and I'm not criticizing, we've got amazing culture, we have amazing neuroscience, brilliant understanding about the brain, amazing stuff about the brain, there's no question. And it's an incredible science, it's fascinating. But the thing is, therefore, it's not the point to look into your mind, because we don't posit. I mean, we know we have feelings. That's why we have therapists. Mr. Freud started this one, isn't it? But we're mainly focusing on the brain, mainly focusing on the physical. And then also in daily life, we know, like I said before, from the second we wake up until the time we go to sleep, what's our experience is very powerful. The external world is a super powerful force. And the nature of our senses is that they are dragged to the outside world. That's what's so compelling. It's just natural having this body with these 5 sense consciousnesses. We're super sensitive to the external world. I mean, the tiniest sound can make you distressed. The tiniest taste can make you happy. So of course we're focused on the outside world. So then our unspoken assumption is that obviously, no, it's not just unspoken, it's actually proved, it's reinforced in our science and reinforced in our psychology, that the outside world is where life is. I'm this occupant of life, isn't it? And this is this outside world. And so we spend our lives, because we spend our lives trying to manipulate the outside world to get it to just be so. Why? Because we believe without question, and it's reinforced in neuroscience and reinforced in psychology, that that's what makes you happy. And we all know we want happiness and don't want suffering. So if you think about an ordinary daily person's life, whether it's a monkey or an ant or a human, that's how we spend our lives, completely focused on the external world, the objects of the senses. And the way we interpret those things, that's why I've got to look at the technology of how this, because we've got mistaken views, Buddha says, that we believe completely that's where happiness is and suffering is. So because we're so focused on the outside world, and this is the way the life is having a body like we've got, even just to get out of bed to go to your kitchen, you've got to navigate the stairs and you've got to use whatever senses you've got to get to the kitchen. You've got no time to look at your mind. So in other words, the only time we notice what's happening inside here is when it's shouting loud. That's the tragedy. In other words, we don't notice what is happening in our mind until our body feels it. That's the tragedy. And that's why I use this analogy, and it's a joke, but it's a really serious one. It's a really profound one. It's like you've never heard of mechanics, car mechanics. You've never known of such a thing. And you don't know about impermanence. And you don't know that cars will disintegrate. You don't know it's made up of thousands of sensitive bits that need a lot of maintaining. You just never heard of that. So you drive the car, you drive it to the ground. And one day on the highway, 100 kilometers an hour, the wheels are falling off. And you go, oh, what'll I do? The wheels are falling off. I mean, so you imagine how stupid you would be seen if you thought that. Well, that's exactly how we are with our lives. We have never thought that there's a method to know what's going on inside. We don't notice the wheels wobbling, in other words. We've never paid attention. We're so obsessed with getting what we want. We're so obsessed with the outside world. We're not noticing the vehicle, the person. We only notice when the wheels are coming off, which is when you want to kill your boyfriend. The commonest question people say to me about anger, well, when I'm about to kill my boyfriend, what should I do? That's saying when I'm about to, the wheels falling off at 100 k's an hour, what'll I do? It's the wrong question. The best you can do is damage control. The real learning is learn about mechanics, please, and know that next time you can start taking care of the wheels wobbling. And this is the point now that Buddha's making. When we can start to know about the mind, be paying it, that's why we have to have a practice every day and start to be conscious of what the hell is going on between our ears and be able to identify it and label it accurately, because that's what runs the show. Then you would never have wheels falling off, and that's not a joke. But you look at our demented culture. We are so neurotic, so overwhelmed, so much depression, so many people killing themselves, children killing themselves, because we don't have a method
to look at our mind. We only notice when it hits the body, and then we blame the outside, and then we look into the past trying to find the cause. I mean, it's a wonder we're not killing ourselves and each other daily, you know. That's a simple answer to your question. That's why we can't. That's why it's so hard to see our mind, because we don't pay attention to it.
And then the attachment in our mind, I mean, anger and depression is pretty obvious, but noticing the attachment, it's invisible. It
is invisible, exactly. And that's where, but this is the interesting point too. Before we do that, and this is kind of boring, we don't want to hear about this. You know, there's these different levels of practice. So junior school, I call it that, and this packaging the Tibetans are so brilliant at, this path to enlightenment, it's presenting the different philosophical viewpoints, the different things we need to internalize, the different approaches to life in different levels of capacity. So junior school, they call it Lama Zopa, respecting the lineage, very politely translates this first level of practice as the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, it's a big mouthful for calling it junior school, isn't it? Junior school is kind of immediate to us. We get that, you know? So what's junior school practice? Well, big surprise. It's got nothing to do with your mind yet. This is very surprising. The Buddhism is always describing we have body, we have speech, and we have mind. So the Buddha's view is clearly what's in the mind drives everything. But look at us. Look at us. We're a body, and we have sounds coming out the mouth, you know. So look at the world. Look at the world, what it does. Look at it's what impacts upon others is the way we use our body, whether we hand over $20 or whether we punch a person in the nose, that's the body, or what comes out the mouth. But we don't even think like this. We don't pay attention. We know we've got speech. We know we have a body, but like, who cares? We just have this big sense of big inherent concrete lump of me plodding through life, allowed to do and say and think what I like. I can think what I like, we say. I can say what I like. I can do what I like. So what we have is zero, from the Buddhist perspective, zero awareness of the different components of ourselves and the impact of these components on ourselves first and upon others. So the very first level of practice, I think that the Tibetans have a saying, when you're with others, watch your behavior. So what's behavior? Body and speech. Control your body and control your speech. This is junior school, entry level, grade 1 teaching of Buddha, according to karma, because the Buddhist fundamental point is this: every millisecond of what we think and do and say, without exception, it's a natural law, and this natural law runs the universe. It's the law of cause and effect, the law of karma. Karma means action. Simply that. It's every millisecond of what we think and do and say, just naturally sows seeds in our mind, or even more deliciously, programs our mind, just naturally, without any awareness. Every millisecond of what we think and do and say, every ant, every monkey, every dog, every human, same law, runs the universe. Sows seeds in our minds, leaves tendencies in our mind, programs our mind with those exact actions of body, speech, and mind. And then those seeds will never go astray. There's nothing that goes astray. Everything stays in our mind. Everything is programmed in there. And then eventually these seeds, it's a good analogy, will ripen in the future, in this mind, further down the track, as our experiences. Dalai Lama calls the law of karma self-creation. It's a really shocking concept, because we're so addicted to believing, like I said, with this lump of me made by someone else who plogs me on this planet, and then I've got to handle things, you know. It's like a demented idea. Buddha says we create ourselves. We come into this life programmed with our own tendencies. So, given that every millisecond of what I think and do and say programs me, and given, number 2, I don't want suffering and do want happiness, then it follows logically that I better make sure that what I do with my body and speech first is not something that'll create future suffering for myself. So what creates suffering? Guess what Buddha says? My future suffering is the result of my actions of doing suffering. My thoughts produce those more thoughts. And so everything I think and do and say produces my future. So if I do not want future suffering, then I have to stop causing it. So karma is this natural law, and what I do produces 4 results. 1, a type of rebirth. All this is pretty abstract for us, of course it is. 2, guess what? Hardly rocket science. The more you do something, the more you get the habit to do it. So love produces you to have a tendency to be loving. Angry produces the tendency to be angry. 3, it's called experiences similar to the cause, which is all the stuff that how you're seen and treated by others, because we're very social beings, aren't we? So whatever I do, say, and think will, 1, ripen as a type of rebirth. 2, ripen as a tendency to keep doing it. 3, ripen as an experience like it at the hands of others, back to me, and even the environmental cause, even environment, the way the physical world impacts upon us. We are the creators of all of this, Buddha says, and it's all laid out in depth in all the literature. So, given that the body and the speech are the obvious grosser level of who I am, and given that's what other people see and hear, and then given that I don't want future suffering, guess what? Buddha says, well, honey child, back off and leave sentient beings in peace. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't rape, don't jump on the wrong person, take someone else's partner, don't lie, don't badmouth behind backs. Not because God said. That's the reason as a Christian. This is a big difference, a massively important difference. A sin by definition is doing what God said not to do. So the reason Jesus exhorts us not to kill and lie and steal and jump on the wrong partner is because guess what, honey? Because God said. This is the reason. It's a powerful point. But Buddha's not a creator. No such concept in Buddhism. So Buddha exhorts us not to kill, lie, and steal, because guess what, Robina, baby child? This will cause you similar experiences in the future. And if you're going to be loving and kind and wise, guess what? That's the cause of your happiness in the future. You're the boss, babe. So the first level of practice, don't worry about your mind yet. This is already stupendous. Your body and your speech are the servants of your mind. So if you've got anger in the mind, guess what? It comes out vomiting out your mouth. If you've got anger in your mind, it's got to come with your fist. Your body and your speech do what the mind wants, but we're so disconnected we can't see this. And we don't think it matters, quote unquote. That's like saying, I can eat whatever I want. That means you don't understand that what you eat will bring consequences. Well, your thoughts will bring consequences. Your speech will bring consequences to you, baby child, and your actions will bring consequences. So the first level of practice, and this is already sublime level of practice, I can't tell you, control your body and speech. So why would you do that? Because whatever your body and speech do are driven by your mind. And you can't get to your mind yet because the body and speech are dominating, because your physical experience is so powerful. So we've got to first use our mind to harness our body and speech. So even with a strong practice, this is first level of practice, control your body, control your speech, don't harm, don't kill, don't steal. They're the heavy duty ones. And then you can extrapolate. Well, that's, if everything I think and do, if everything I do and say, which is just expressions of my crazy delusions, they're going to cause me future suffering, then I can start to realize, well, cake doesn't mind if I eat 10 pieces. People mind if you punch them 10 times or jump on 10 people who don't want you, because it's people, sentient beings. Ants don't want to get killed. Mice don't want to get killed. That's the first level. But then you can extrapolate. Well, maybe I should start eating less cake because your hand should stay in your lap. Why? Because you don't want to increase your attachment. So by subduing the servants of your attachment, you're beginning to subdue attachment. By subduing the servants of your anger, you begin to subdue anger. And then you've got the luxury to go to high school and to start to look into the anger and attachment itself. Then it's easy. If you've got no control over your behavior, and I know this is my life, and always all this self-pity because people couldn't see my little heart, But I'd blur out every word I thought, say what I wanted, get into trouble, then feel all sorry for myself. And one time I was moaning to Lama Yeshe with all this self-pity. And Lama Yeshe would always just say like one word, and it was like sort of God coming from the sky. It was so powerful. He always said such powerful words to me. And I remember one time he said, there's nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behavior. It was like a revelation, I can't tell you. Because I always used to think, I am no good. No, he says, you're fine, just your ridiculous behavior. Shut your mouth and zip your lip and keep your hands to yourself. So controlling your body and speech is the most stupendous practice. Already you become more subdued, you become more disciplined, you become more self-respectful. This is the practice to focus on. That's profound. Then it's easy to work on your mind, which we can get to. But we don't even consider this in our culture. It sounds so boring, I'm allowed to say what I like. And, we don't know why we have to vomit out every word we feel, I'm allowed to, we say, like some kind of, because we don't, it's just ridiculous because we don't realise that we are producing ourselves.
So, Venerable, there's a question here about, often in our culture we say, listen to your body or listen to your mind. So this is a slightly different take, isn't it? A Buddhist take of how to pay attention to one's body or how to pay attention to one's mind.
What? I don't understand.
So a difference between listening to your body or listening to your mind. So often in our, Western culture, we'll have that kind of saying. But
oh,
this
okay.
is
Listen to the body. I don't see. I don't. It's different. Some people. It's interesting, that one. I don't know if you're meaning this, but a very strong one, like people who do yoga and things. I'm not being rude now. Talk about how the body. You know, things happen in your body. It's true. There is in Vajrayana, there's a very marvelous detailed description. This is the system of the Tibetan medical system. The subtle physical energy. We've got this subtle physical energy. There's 72,000 subtle channels. It's the same as the Hindu one, the same as the Chinese one, similar. And then coursing through all those channels is the different wind energies, or prana, which is a subtle physicality. And then inextricably linked to all those wind energies coursing through our entire body are our different states of mind. This is really not how we think. Like you go to your Tibetan doctor, you feel your pulses, and she can feel the imbalance of certain winds, and she knows that wind energy is connected to your attachment. That's why you're having anxiety. She'll feel these pulses, and she'll know that's to do with your anger. That's why you're having kind of explosions, you know, because the body and mind at the subtle level are intimately connected. So of course we feel things in our body, and that's a major way that many people use to become familiar with what your body's doing. But some people, I don't use that method. I would never clue to pay attention to my body. So then the Buddhist one, of course, is the emphasis is on your thoughts. Mind means your thoughts. And even if you don't think you're a very intellectual person, or I want to go into this in more detail, all our emotions, which become physical because of this connection between body and mind, we only notice it when it gets to the body. But even that is too late. Even to notice what your body is doing is too late, because your mind's already working at a subtle level. So that's why we've got to have some concentration, control our body and speech, live in vows of morality, do purification every day, which works on your body and speech, puts atomic bombs under those, and that gives you the space. It's like pulling out all the weeds, and now you have space to grow the flowers. And then you can begin to see your mind before it gets anywhere near your damn body. That's the real skill we have to learn. Is that what you're implying, Miffy?
I think that was what it was about.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There's a couple of other questions that are quite related to this. So one about if our consciousness is beginningless and endless, could we think this subtle mind that you're talking about, could it be considered as being deathless?
Yeah, deathless, even a term, it's one of the names in Tibetan. Yeah, deathless, it's true, it's deathless. Yes, exactly. And when you've realized emptiness and cut all the delusions and cut all your negative karma, you literally are deathless. You choose to take rebirths out of compassion because you're on the bodhisattva path. You're no longer a victim of the law of karma. You're in charge. Absolutely.
And then the reason that we keep on getting stuck in samsara is because we are attached to our sensory attachments, and that's why we keep on cycling in samsara.
Attachment is a huge one. I mean, we'll go into this in more detail. Maybe we'll have our break, and then we'll go into I'll present the typical one of the way the evolution of this samsara, the evolution of how we create karma, and how it's driven by attachment and anger, and how we learn and how we have to cut that cycle. We'll go into that, yes, in more detail, more logically. Yes, definitely. Any more?
How can we not engage in emotional attachment conversations without appearing to be unkind?
Oh, exactly. It's a good point, isn't it? It's a very good point, yeah.
Practicing non-attachment, people often feel like right. You don't care.
That's a really good point, actually. Let's look at this attachment and the opposite of it. It's a really powerful point. Okay. So that means we have to understand attachment. Okay, and this is just, multifaceted. It's huge. But before we go into more detail about that, it's, naturally the opposite of attachment does sound like the word detachment, doesn't it? And that sounds like indifference, and that's a really major mistake. So I think, if you're trying to get rid of attachment to chocolate cake, let's say, because you eat too much and you just don't want to get fat and you're sick of thinking about it all day, because that's one of the functions of attachment. You can't stop thinking about the bloody object. So then it's obvious you want detachment from the cake. That's a very good thing. You do want that. It's very clear. You want to see the cake and leave it on the table and not have a panic attack. That's detachment. That's great. But when it comes to human beings, that could be dangerous. And that really implies one of the big misunderstandings when people start to become Buddhists and get all excited about giving up attachment, and you're in a relationship and you become all kind of holy and, would you want some tea, darling? Oh, no, I don't mind. Would you want some coffee? No, I don't care. Would you like to come to bed and have sex? No, I'm renounced. You become this dreadful, horrible person. Well, back off, go away. If you don't want to live with me, bugger off, Excuse me, I'm in Australia. I'm allowed to swear. You Americans. It's okay. Well, no, I'm not allowed to swear. I forgot.
You're not allowed to swear.
I forgot.
You have to give a warning, a PG warning.
I won't say it. I won't say it anymore, I promise. So the point is, we misunderstand that giving up attachment when it comes to people and the world is becoming you know, detach, fine. Then go to the mountains, please. Get out of a relationship and stop living with another person and becoming all boring. If you want to be detached, yes, give it up and go to the mountains and get some realizations. Brilliant. But if you're going to live with a human being as your wife or your husband, you're going to go to work every day and be in the traffic, you've got to learn to not be attached to getting what you want, but be kind to others. So if you could argue with human beings, by lessening attachment, you develop more kindness. If you don't, you're on the wrong track. You really misunderstood. It's a really key point. Do you understand, people? And the key to that is to have to distinguish, and this is the unique one in Buddhist psychology. So maybe now is the time, and this is another question. We'll go into more detail after the break. You're going to have a 2-hour break or a 1-hour break? 2 hours, isn't it?
It's a 2-hour break, yep.
Right, okay. I'll try and stay awake because it gets me to midnight. But that's okay. I'll do my best. I'll do all my practices. I mentioned it to you. You didn't say anything, so I thought, okay, she must know, so that's okay. I'm fine. It's good. I'm happy. That's good. I don't care. So anyway, that was, yeah. So the point is, I think it's 35. We can start now. Okay. Are there more questions, Miffy, first of all?
There is another one about uncertainty and looking into the future seeming more and more uncertain in terms of the environment and COVID.
Yes.
So how can we prepare our children to accept?
I know. This is a really, thank you, Miffy, I'm jumping in. That's a really, really good point. And this is where, you know, this is where when we understand, I mean, if you have the view of karma, the Buddhist one, which is a much more long-term view, it's like personal history. We've got a long view of history in our culture, and we can see the way the world is going. But we're also, in karmically, it's like your personal history. So when you understand the view of karma, one thing, you apply that in your daily life. But the other one is when you start to lessen attachment and lessen expectations, which is part of attachment, and all these fantasies, everything should be perfect, and you lessen grasping at things as unchanging, then you become more realistic. So when realistic always sounds a bit depressing to us, you know. We've got almost think we've got to live in a fantasy world, which is foolish. But living in being realistic means seeing what's going on, and then you see. This is where you really add the compassion wing. This is the bodhisattva path. The courage, the attitude of the bodhisattvas is so powerful, you know, that no matter, the attitude is, once you work on your own mind, you lessen attachment, you lessen your grasping, you work on your mind, you live in vows, you purify, you become more content, more fulfilled in yourself, and that's the consequence. That's the point, first of all. There's the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, okay? The wisdom wing is all the work we're talking about now, which is where you work on your mind. You understand karma, you live in vows, you discipline your body and speech, you do lots of purification, you have a daily practice, you get less grasping at change, you get less fearful of change, you get less fear in general, you become more realistic, more engaged in the world, you've got less attachment, less fantasies, you have less anger, less depression. This is literally the consequence of practice. You have to remember that. So what do you think that means? You will become more content. So it won't matter so much what is out there. I mean, that's my friends in prison who are really doing this work. They're living in these garbage dumps, being treated like animals, but they're not unhappy because their mind is happy. This is the point. We don't quite hear that. When we hear giving up attachment and giving up this and giving up that, it sounds depressing, but you're giving up the causes of suffering. So what do you think the consequences are? You will be more happy, quite literally. And your happiness and no longer is dependent upon the outside world. So whether you're living in a slum in Mumbai, or whether you're living in a multi-million-dollar house in Sydney, it won't matter so much because you are living your life, you're dealing with your reality, and you're not depending on the outside for your happiness. You are more content already in yourself. So then it won't matter what happens. And then you add the compassion wing to it, and you realize you need to help people. You're now more content, you're more fulfilled, you know what's going on, so you have compassion for others. And that makes you very stable and very courageous and very optimistic. Because the bodhisattvas have a term, as the Dalai Lama says, they think in terms of eons. They will never give up, no matter how many lifetimes it takes. It doesn't matter how bad the life is, because when you're internally content yourself, it won't matter so much how the world is. But you will try to make it a better place and try to help others. This is the point. But the real one is when we hear the Buddhist one of renunciation, giving up this and giving up that. You're not giving up happiness. You're accomplishing happiness. Because you're realizing it doesn't depend on cakes and beautiful things and handsome husbands. When you know that, that's the revelation. That really brings more fulfillment and contentment in yourself. And then you can handle the dramas, and then you add compassion to that. It's very profound. I hope that helps. And we're all capable of it. That's the point. So let's look into... See, let's look at compassion for a minute. I mean, this is what I've been so moved, by in the different stories. I read all my different papers on my iPad, different newspapers. You can tell I'm old. I don't read social media. Miffy reads social media. Even though she's also old. What? What?
I threw myself off social media.
Oh, you did? So what do you do instead? What do you read instead?
To the blessings of Punsog Rinpoche. He liberated me from social media. And it was also thanks to your amazing story about offering him a iPad and how he declined and said, I don't want to be so distracted. And I was so moved by that.
Oh, you gave up yours.
And, then Punsog Rinpoche came to visit Langri Tangpa Centre, and I kid you not, I woke up in the morning with my first thought was, I am free of Facebook. It was like a true cessation, and I've been off it.
So do you read the newspapers and watch the telly?
I watch the telly and I read the New Yorker, which is also thanks
Oh, there
to
you go. Well, that's okay. There you go. So if I think you've become old. You've joined the old people, because that's what old people do. Young people do social media and old people read newspapers. Anyway,
young people do TikTok, Venerable.
Oh, no, I've heard about TikTok. I've heard about that. Yeah. No, I was even thinking of doing TikTok. That's interesting. Why not? If you want to help people, it's fine. Helping people on the social media is great. Anyway, when I read whatever I read, I forgot my story now. It's gone so long. What was I talking about? I can't remember. Yeah, but all the good stories now. This is the compassion wing. You see, this is the thing. We know ourselves. If we're a little bit content in ourselves and a little bit fearless and a little bit sort of managing things, then you can't help but notice other people. So this is what I've been so moved. Ordinary people, like, one chef started cooking meals for his nurse sister. So now he's cooking thousands of free meals. I mean, you're so moved by these stories. Ordinary people who are suffering also. I mean, that to me is really powerful and really encouraging. People who do things for other people in these difficult times. And this is what's so interesting. They all know in modern psychology, everyone talks about the happiness that comes from helping others. It's a very powerful well-being. And this is really the Buddhist logical view, absolutely. When, happiness, a good feeling, a happy feeling that comes when you've been able to help another is a way more profound happy feeling than eating a piece of chocolate cake. But it's hard to do it because the cake is more compelling, isn't it? It seems like more effort to be kind to people. But it's so moving, all these stories. And this is where I find my friends in prison. My friend Mitchell on death row in Kentucky, who's getting towards his death date. He's been there like 35 years, meandering his way through the courts on the appeals, That's the joke about death row. It costs the American taxpayers billions of dollars. They're all poor. I've never met a rich person on death row, I promise. Ever. No way. It's only the poor people. They all have to have lawyers. So 35 years it takes to go through the courts, all these appeals. So anyway, Mitch is getting close to his death date. I'm ready for that electric jolt, he said. He's really just worked on his mind. I've known him for 25 years. He's just come to terms with his reality, lives in this garbage dump with his red jumpsuit, has his little practice all day, does his Lama Chobe, all his practice is amazing. And he helps people. He helps all the other guys on death row, So people just adore Mitchell. He's just good, and this is his good, kind human being, dealing with his own reality, come to terms with his own life, accepted, the things, regrets the harm he's done, helping other people. He makes little things for people. He's incredible, So you can be on death row living in a garbage dump and be a happy human being. And that's what I've really learned from working with people in prison. They're, for me, the living proof that happiness comes from the mind. It's just not just I have to say the words myself. They're much better proof of it than me, It's really profound for me. It's so clear. When you're more content in yourself from giving up attachment and to fears and dramas and expectations and depression and grasping at permanence, you become more fearless. That's a good way to put it. You become fearless. You see reality without resisting it. You just accept it, It's much more powerful. There's no drama. And then you can have more empathy for others. It's so clear. And you have more empathetic, more connection, and then people adore you. I mean, we want to be loved. That's the best way to love people is love, best way for people to love you is love them. So it's very powerful, the compassion wing. It's so clear, People who help others is fantastic. Anyway, what else? More questions, or we'll go into some topic and go into depth a bit.
Yeah, so there was a question about our mind and our consciousness. Can we think of it as, is it impermanent? Is it deathless? Is it permanent? What's kind of the way to get it?
Okay, good point. There's different meanings to that word. When we say permanent, we mean lasting forever. No, that's not the meaning in Buddhism. It's more nuanced than that. There's very detailed descriptions in the literature about this meaning of this word impermanent. Impermanent means actually changing from moment to moment, like dynamic, not set in stone, changing from moment to moment. So you can have something that lasts, a cup that you made in the pot, got it out, you did it in the pottery, you made it, and then it broke after 1 minute. Well, that lasted for 1 minute, didn't it? And it's impermanent. But it's impermanent not so much that it didn't last, it's impermanent because it changes from moment to moment. Now, your mind is also impermanent insofar as it changes from moment to moment. It's dynamic, but it's beginningless and endless. So it's different things. Permanent in Buddhism has a different meaning, not like that. When we say permanent, we mean lasting forever. And we also mean unchanging. We don't want things to change, you know, if they're good, of course. So your mind is impermanent, but it's changing from moment to moment, but it's beginningless and endless. There's no contradiction. That's the way to say it. So listen, let's start then. I just want to get into something in a meaty way. We've been touching on different points here. Let's look at... Yeah, we have to look at attachment and aversion. I mean, we've all heard this 1,000 times, some of us, but we have to keep hearing it. I've been speaking about it for so many years and I never get bored because every time you say it and think about it, you go a bit deeper. Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for 1 whole year. We'll never begin to understand it until we start digging deep inside, doing the work internally. And this is where we have to distinguish between the intellectual and the experiential. But the intellectual, if you leave it there, intellectual is useless, it's dry. But intellectual is the stepping stone to the experiential. In just the same way that when you learn to make a cake, you've got to learn these complicated recipes. That's intellectual, isn't it? You can imagine learning an entire book of recipes and saying you're a cook. And then someone says, please make a cake. Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, you'd be called a phony. Music, you might know all the brilliant musical theory, but not be able to play the piano. And that's our big mistake with the Dharma, because it's the mind that does the intellectual and it's the mind that does the experiential, and we find it hard to see the difference. And we've got to be patient, though. So don't dismiss the intellectual because you haven't yet experienced it. You've got to have the intellectual first. And that by thinking about it, it digs deeper, it goes deeper, it goes deeper, and then eventually the penny drops and it becomes your experience. So be happy even with intellectual knowledge, but don't leave it there. That's the big thing. So, okay. Like I said, this lamrim, this packaging, these Tibetans are so good at, of the whole path, all of Buddhist philosophy, psychology, epistemology, whatever it is, the whole works. All the essential points have been taken and presented in this nice, orderly way. Orderly according to the capacity of the disciple and orderly experientially. It's experiential, not just intellectual. So the first level of practice, junior school, I call it, is control your body and control your speech. Control the servants of your mind. It's a profound level of practice, I tell you. It's way more powerful than we think, you know. I mean, I always use this example. I'm not trying to praise my family like we're all saints or something. But there are 7 siblings, and we're all very volatile, like me, speak very fast. I always quote that story, Miffy. Remember 30 years ago when you invited 3 of us nuns down from Chen Reisig? I always quote this story all over the world. You must have heard it so many times. And that 3 of us gave a 90-minute talk and you transcribed the 3 teachings, and the 2 nuns were 8 pages and mine were 24.
Yes, remember and possibly it was Gail Bell or someone from here that actually did the transcription.
Oh, was it? Anyway, I always quote that story. Anyway, never mind. The point I'm making is my family, like me, 6 girls and a brother, and all pretty volatile. My brother's the most low-key of all. He's the 7th of them. He came at the end. He was born during, anybody know, any Australians around? Yeah, you're Australian. He was born during Dad and Dave. Anybody old enough to remember Dad and Dave? There you go, Francis. That's right, Marg. On Sunday, it was Dad and Dave. It was this hilarious radio program, this ridiculous Australian Dad and Dave. It was a radio show. My grandma used to do all the radio shows because we didn't have television then. And he was born in May 17, 1953. That was my brother. Anyway, the point is, volatile family, all lived together, so many babies all at once. My mother ran out of money, and my father, we had to share beds, and we're just all very volatile, you know, so we shout and yell and fight and scream. We all loved each other, but this is what families do, isn't it? So then we got older and we all left home, and we come home for Christmas and you'd fight, you know, naturally, because you vomit out your mouth. We didn't punch each other, we didn't use our bodies to do harm, and most of it's just the mouth, isn't it? So I remember the last 20, they're all good people, they don't like religion or anything, they're all given up going to mass. or good Catholics in the beginning. And then they know I'm a Buddhist and they accept that, you know, but they don't ask me about it. It's okay. So the point is, over the years, because we're all old now, we're all between 70 and 80, the seven of us, right? Nearly 70 and 80. Practically, not quite. So anyway, we're all fairly close in age and we're good friends. And we see each other regularly, we've got FaceTime and all that business. But over the last, I'd say 20 plus years, it's become this unspoken agreement between us that we do not talk about each other behind our backs, which is one of our commonest things. I want to go into body and speech here and discuss it. It's so powerful. And two, we've made a decision not, and it's not conscious, it's not like self-conscious, it's very natural. We do not argue with each other about, because we've all got different views about things, very strong different views about different things. So we've got masses to talk about when we're together that we agree on, so we all laugh. So I honestly say, before in those years when we did fight, you'd always have this left over, wouldn't you, this hurt that Polly said this, or Janet said that, or Julie said this, and you talk about behind each other's backs. They were pretty harmonious in general, but that's always just there, and you carry it like a burden, you know? Then you fight when you're together. But now we don't, and I can't describe to you just the feeling of lightness and the harmony, and even we now rejoice in each other's good qualities, which we never did as siblings, because we've controlled our mouths. I just cannot stress this enough, you know. It's something that we would never think of. We just think it's our right to say what we like. We don't think it, quote unquote, matters. And this is the first point about karma. Forget the benefit to each other. But the benefit to ourselves is so evident when we get this. You imagine you're in home on your own all day and you shout at the radio, you shout at the iPad, and you shout at the news, and you're cursing and swearing the next door neighbour. No one's hearing you. Who do you think you are harming? We don't even get it. We're demented. We're so cut off from ourselves. We just don't get it. Who do you think you're harming? Yourself. Because the Buddha says everything we think, everything we say, everything we say, everything we do, it leaves impressions in the mind, reverberations, seeds, imprints, programs us. So it's so evident, but the penny doesn't drop for us. We don't quite get this. But it's profound when we do, I tell you. So the first level of practice, Buddha's first instruction, the essence of the first level of practice, there's more to it than this, but the essence of it is when it comes to abiding by the laws of karma. For Buddha, this is a natural law that runs the universe. He did not make it up. He's not speculating. He has observed it to be so, that every single tiny sentient being is doing and saying and thinking whatever they're doing that programs their mind and produces their future. That every sentient being now is the product of what we have done before. We are our own creators, quite literally, whether you're a fish, an ant, or dog, or whatever. It's a very shocking concept, very amazing idea, very remarkable. It's all in the literature, it's all there, if you study it more depth, you know. So the implication of this is that you have some self-respect because you're sick of suffering. So the first level of Buddha is saying, basically, babies, please back off. And don't kill and steal and lie and harm and badmouth behind backs and abuse. Don't do this. Why not, Robina? Why not, Buddha? Because, sweetie pie, you're sick of suffering because everything you do will program you with those things. And you don't want that. You don't want that. So it's the real reason to do this is not for the sake of others, but it's for your own sake. And that is hard for us in our culture. We think, oh, that sounds selfish. No, it's called intelligent. No one thinks you're selfish if you don't eat bad food, if you give up sugar and cigarettes. People think you're intelligent. But as soon as it comes to morality, we get very kind of caught up and miserable, you know. It's very weird. The Buddha's is incredible view that whatever we think and do and say. So we have to become conscious, first of your body and speech. At least control them first. At least control your mouth. And that's what I'm saying about my sisters and my brother. At least we've controlled our body and speech with each other. So the result for ourselves is we're more peaceful, and the result for ourselves is that we can be harmonious together. It's incredible. It's so evident, you know. I'm not saying we're all saints. We're not. But an effort. It's very powerful. And look at families. When you hear the schisms in Buddhist groups. Just recently with the centre, you know, I've been talking with there's a terrible schism. The person who was the person who was spiritual program coordinator criticising the director, and this great big schism, and people leaving. I mean, you hear it everywhere. Every organisation has this. Every family has this, and it's all the behind backs, you know, creating division, the politics of it. It's so depressing. But controlling the speech is a stupendous practice, you know. So the first level of practice is this one, control your body and control your speech, which takes enormous discipline. And the reason to do it isn't because you want to be seen as a nice girl, it's because you're sick of suffering. You're sick of these habits. You're sick of this rubbish in your mind. You're sick of being a victim to cakes and cigarettes and people. That's the point. So the attitude becomes self-respect. some kind of dignity. It's for your benefit. It's so powerful, I tell you. So then you become more formal in your practice, and then eventually you might take refuge. So that's a really powerful kind of little kind of external ceremony you do to reinforce your commitment, having checked on the teachings, having checked on the teachers, having checked on Buddha, and really having some confidence that this is the way you want to present, the way you want to proceed in your life. You commit to it. There's a formal little ceremony you do in front of somebody whom you would take as one of your teachers. You see them as representing the Buddha for you, and you're kind of plugging into this power source. You know, so for example, Love has given me permission to do that, so I do that with something we just did recently in one group. And then, you know, I got it from my Lama, who got it from their Lama, they got it from their teacher, and all the way back in an unbroken chain of humans back to the Buddha. It's very tasty. You plug into that power source, and you connect with, you commit in your own mind to abide by, you know, you commit to rely upon the Buddha and his teachings, like that, you know. And then eventually, or at the same time, you can take the 5 layperson's vows. Now, vows is a really powerful way to practice. This is a really powerful way to control your body and speech. I mean, Buddha loves his vows. He even says that vows are like this subtle physical energy that is visible to clairvoyance. It's so potent. And Lama Zopa says, you know, this is where we have to go into calm now a little bit. 5 minutes before our break. Lama Zopa says you can be doing bucket loads of practice every day, but not even simply have a vow not to kill. And then he says you can be another person who's just got a vow not to kill, but doesn't do much other practice. The power of vows is such, and this is Buddha's teaching, we'll go into it more after the break. The power of vows is such that every second you're living in that vow, not consciously not killing, not stealing, but you're living in the vow of not killing, not stealing, not lying. 24 hours a day, you're ticking over virtuous karmic seeds in your mind, and you're putting atomic bombs under the habits to kill, lie, steal. So it's a profound practice, and it seems like so simple to do it. 24 hours a day. We'll go into more detail about that after the break. We'll go into more detail after the break. Full stop. We'll have a break now. So what are you going to go do? Have some lunch or something? But it's only noon. It's noon where you are, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So we have to have a 2-hour break because there's people who've booked for the second session in 2
o'clock. Of course, exactly. I'm happy with that. So you people, okay, just some food for thought, and whether we've heard this 1,000 times or not at all, think of it the same way. And all these seeds have gone. We'll dedicate. All these seeds have gone in. Nothing's gone astray. We might, you know, a few pennies might have dropped. How fantastic! That's what happens every time I speak. Some pennies drop. So thank you very much. And we think how marvellous these seeds we planted. Maybe we continue to nourish them even this next 2 hours so that we can become an amazing being in the future, so we can be a benefit to others. That's it. Dedicate. Thank you, Miffy. Thank you, all you kind people. And I'll see you in a couple of hours. But remember, impermanence. Don't guarantee it. Don't expect it. I remember one, Geshe Lama Kontrog one time said to one person when he had to build a retreat hut. He said something like, build it for the next 200 years, but knowing you could die tomorrow. That's the way to think. You don't just go, oh, well, I can die tomorrow, why bother? No, don't do that. Do everything. So have this next 2 hours of lunch. Know the teachings will come in 2 hours' time. You do not know what's going to happen. So then recognize impermanence, have your lunch within the reality of impermanence, and if everything collapses and I die and the things collapse and my internet dies, there won't be another class, and you won't be disappointed. Whereas if you believe it's going to happen, she promised me it'd happen, and you want to sue, you're going to sue Miffy, you know? Okay.